Jim Morrison is one of the most famous rock and roll singers in the world.
I'd like to do a song that, or a piece of music that's just a pure expression of joy.
You're going to find the real Doors, the real Jim Morrison. You'll see the passion, you'll see some good musicians playing some good music, and a darn good poet doing some of his poetry.
By the time Jim Morrison had slipped into myth, somewhere between the Paris bathtub and the endless echo of the Doors' final bars, the world had already made up its mind about him. The Lizard King, they called him, rock's shaman poet, a Dionysian figure in leather trousers whose voice could curl into menace or melt into seduction.
And you hesitate through, no time to wallow in the mire.
But beneath the mythology, behind the flame-lit theatrics and the controversy, was something simpler, something perhaps more surprising. A man with a deep and abiding love for the blues, for crooners and classical composers. For the primal pulse and the silken swing of older, richer musical traditions. Rock and roll, I don't listen to that stuff, Morrison once said in an interview with the kind of offhand candor that was his trademark. I normally listen to classical music, or Sinatra. At the heart of Morrison's musical DNA was the blues, not the blues' aesthetic adopted by guitar heroes in paisley shirts, but the authentic smouldering Delta-born blues of Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, and John Lee Hooker. Those guys, he once told a journalist, they weren't entertainers, they were conjurers. They told the truth, even when it hurt. That's what I wanted to do. It shows. From the very first Doors album, you can hear that low-down influence bubbling under the surface. Songs like Backdoor Man, originally penned by Willie Dixon and performed by Howlin' Wolf, were reinterpreted by the band not as ironic pastiche, but as reverent homage. Morrison, in particular, inhabited the material as if it had been written for him in a previous life. I'm a backdoor man, he howls, not with adolescent bravado, but with knowing sensuality. His admiration for the blues extended beyond performance and into his conception of musical truth. The blues never lies, he once said. It just sits there like a big raw truth. Jimmy Reed, the Mississippi-born bluesman known for his laid-back delivery and harmonica-driven grooves, held a particular place in Morrison's affections. His song Baby What You Want Me to Do was said to be a favourite of Jim's, often played at rehearsals and after-hours jam sessions. According to Doors keyboardist Ray Manzarek, Morrison was obsessed with the song. He loved the simplicity of it, Manzarek recalled. He'd sing it endlessly, just pacing the room, getting into that groove. That's when you saw the real Jim. The band themselves would occasionally slip into full-blown blues mode, most notably on their 5th and 6th albums, Morrison Hotel and LA Woman, records which the singer himself counted among his favourites. We're getting back to what we really are, he said during the sessions for Morrison Hotel. This is the sound I always heard in my head. On tracks like Roadhouse Blues and The Changeling, Morrison sounds less like the acid-drenched mystic of earlier records and more like a juke joint preacher.
I'll keep you wild on the road, you hand upon the wheel.
His voice has more gravel, his phrasing more swing. The lyrics too eschew surrealism for something earthier. And yet Morrison's musical universe was not limited to the 12-bar form. One of the great surprises of his musical tastes was his devotion to Frank Sinatra.
Did what I had to do. I saw it through.
without exemption.
In private moments, Morrison would refer to him simply as the greatest. "There's no one like Frank," he told a reporter in 1969. "The way he phrases, the way he bends a note, it's like he's talking to you but in song. That's power." Peggy Lee was another touchstone. Her sultry delivery and jazz-inflected phrasing captivated Morrison, who once described her as the perfect balance between control and abandon. And then, of course, there was Elvis Presley. Perhaps the most expected of Morrison's influences, and yet still revealing in its specifics. Morrison admired Elvis not just for his music, but for his charisma, his myth-making instinct, and his sheer force of personality. He was the first, Morrison said, the first one to make it all explode. That sense of showmanship, of rock as performance art, clearly left its mark. But unlike Presley, who was polished and packaged by the machine of show business, Morrison remained more guerrilla than groomed, more Rimbaud than RCA. Still, it would be a mistake to see Morrison as merely a bluesman or a crooner in leather trousers. His musical mind was as curious as it was wide-ranging. He had a sincere interest in classical music, often citing composers like Mozart and Wagner as favorites. He was drawn to their structural complexity and emotional intensity. "You can get lost in that stuff," he said. "It's like architecture in sound. There's a whole world in there." This affinity for classical forms perhaps explains some of the Doors' more baroque arrangements, particularly in tracks like The End, or When the Music's Over, where the songs spiral and swell like symphonic movements rather than conventional rock numbers.
Now, right, mama? Now.
And then there was Otis Redding.
I've been loving you.
Though not often listed among Morrison's chief inspirations, Redding's influence peeked through in unexpected ways. On Runnin' Blue, from the Soft Parade, Morrison included a direct lyrical tribute. "Poor Otis dead and gone, left me here to sing his song."
Otis dead and gone, left me here to sing his song. Pretty little girl with a red dress on, poor Otis dead and gone.
Redding's gospel-infused delivery and emotional openness may have offered Morrison a model for his own more confessional moments. Though he never pursued soul music in the same way, Morrison's occasional forays into open-hearted singing, such as on Love Street or Blue Sunday, reveal a performer capable of tenderness as well as menace.
My girl awaits for me in tender time.
His relationship with his contemporaries, however, was complicated. When asked about the Beatles, Morrison was typically dismissive. "They're a studio band," he said. "We're about leaving the best impression on stage, not hiding behind studio effects." According to Manzarek, Morrison had never even heard Led Zeppelin. Whether this was factual or simply Morrison being provocative is unclear, but the sentiment fits. He was not much interested in the fashion of his day. In the end, Jim Morrison's musical taste reads like a catalogue of American longing, the sweaty truths of the blues, the smoky seduction of jazz, the grandeur of the classical, the drama of Sinatra, the swagger of Elvis. He was not a product of the 60s as much as a haunted narrator of it, looking backwards as often as forwards. It's no coincidence that the two albums he prized most, Morrison Hotel and LA Woman, were the ones that looked back to the roots. Stripped of psychedelic ornament and poetic abstraction, they allowed Morrison to fully inhabit the music he loved most. On LA Woman, his voice sounds older, rougher, lived in. On Riders on the Storm, he's no longer shouting from the stage, but whispering from some faraway room. There's an irony here. The man who helped define the sound of the 60s wasn't much interested in its music. He found his truths elsewhere, in the deep moan of a Mississippi bluesman, the studied elegance of Sinatra, the aching reach of Redding. Perhaps that's why his voice still resonates. It wasn't chasing fashion, it was chasing feeling. And feeling, Morrison understood, never goes out of style.